This is Transitional Words in Sequence, lesson number 4, crafting the thesis statement and essay, part 1 of 2. Transitional Words in Sequence, lesson number 4, crafting the thesis statement and essay, part 1 of 2. All copies of the PowerPoint and handouts can be found at magichatwritinginstruction.com. All PowerPoints and handouts can be found at magichatwritinginstruction.com. Transitional Words in Sequence, Lesson 4, Crafting Thesis Statement and Essay, Part 1 of 2. Objective, to model how to craft a thesis statement and an analytical text-based 5-paragraph essay. This lesson is simply going to be modeling the 5-paragraph essay and crafting the thesis statement. For this presentation, there are 2 handouts you need, Article 1 and Article 1 Model Essay and Outline. Both handouts can be found at magichatwritinginstruction.com. Again, you'll need Article 1 and the Article 1 Model Essay and Outline, and that can be found at magichatwritinginstruction.com. So again, we need Article 1 before we can proceed with this lesson. Article 1 is available at magichatwritinginstruction.com. You can find Article 1 at magichatwritinginstruction.com. Article 1 is an article written by the teacher saying that cell phones should be banned from school. This is the article written by the teacher saying cell phones should be banned from school. Please take it out and have it on your desk. In addition to the Article 1 handout, you should also have a copy of the Transitional Words in Sequence Response 1 Model Essay and Outline. This handout is 3 pages and it has a line-by-line, sentence-by-sentence copy of the model essay that we're going to write. Very important handout. Please go to magichatwritinginstruction.com and print out this 3-page handout. Okay, so let's start with our writing prompt. Here's our first writing prompt. Use TE times 3 from Article 1 and craft an essay explaining why cell phones should not be allowed in school. Your response must include an introduction and conclusion. Okay, so let's go through this step by step. So there's certain basic steps that we have to take when completing an essay. The first step is to review the evidence and write the thesis statement. After we've reviewed the evidence and we've got our thesis statement, we will write the introduction. Step 3, write the body paragraphs, and then finally the conclusion. At the outset, I really want you to note that what comes first is the evidence. The evidence comes before the thesis statement. How do you know what your thesis is going to be unless you look first at the evidence? You must review the evidence first. So I want you to think of the thesis statement as your argument, okay? Now, in order to know what your argument is going to be, you first need to know your evidence, okay? So always survey the relevant evidence before deciding on your argument. Try to summarize the evidence that you agree with in one short sentence, okay? That short sentence, your short one-sentence summary of the evidence will be your argument or thesis statement. Always put your short summary of the evidence in the final sentence of your introduction. And again, this sentence is your thesis statement. So note that the thesis statement or argument always goes in the final sentence of your first paragraph, your introduction. So together we're going to survey all the relevant evidence. What does it mean to survey evidence? Well, first we just have to review it, look at it again. And then we have to go through our evidence, underline keywords and points from the relevant evidence. We really want to read our evidence closely, and we want to pick out specific words and phrases that summarize and capture the meaning of our evidence. So let's go ahead and do that. So we start by rereading our evidence. So we look at Article 1, and hopefully you've got your evidence notated somewhere around your Article 1 handout. But you've also got it on a slide that I gave you a lot earlier in the presentation, Transitional Words in Sequence, lesson number 3. We went over Article 1 evidence, but here it is again. These are our 4 pieces of evidence. A student with the cell phone is an uninterested student. One with a short attention span who cares more about socializing than education. That's TE number 1. Then TE number 2, the onus for failure should be placed on distractions in the classroom, specifically cell phones. TE 3, in most cases, contacting the hospital, the police would seem more urgent, and parents can always call the school's main office to reach their children. And finally, TE number 4, cell phones are status symbols. So we need to really re-familiarize ourselves with this evidence, reread it, look at it again, and then the next step is going to be to go through it and look at for phrases and key points. So now I've gone through and I've selected 3 TEs since the prompt only asks for 3, not 4. And within each TE, I'm just underlining phrases that I think are important. So for TE1, an uninterested student. Cell phones equal an uninterested student. That's just simply put, that's what that TE is telling me. TE number 3, the parents can always call the school's main office to reach their children. I just wanted to isolate that part of the TE because it shows that the point here is that cell phones are not needed for emergencies. And then TE number 4, cell phones are status symbols. That's enough. That pretty much captures the meaning. I don't think I need to say too much more. I'm ready now to go on to craft my thesis statement. Okay, so now we've surveyed evidence, we've looked at the evidence in detail, we've isolated key points, we've got our key points here. Cell phones make students less interested in learning, cell phones are not needed for real emergencies, and cell phones are status symbols that encourage the wrong values. Now that we've got our key points and we've surveyed the evidence, we can begin to craft our thesis, which is essentially a summary of the key points that we've taken from our evidence. So here's our summary of our evidence or our thesis statement. Cell phones discourage students from learning, encourage the wrong values, and are not necessary for emergencies, and therefore should not be allowed in school. Now, I want to just point out this is a very basic thesis. Once you become more comfortable writing thesis, you can give it a lot more flair, condense the ideas even more. But I really want to show you, for the purpose of this presentation, how the thesis statement really should contain the sort of seeds for the body paragraph. And I'm going to show you that in the next slide. So keep that in mind as you look at this thesis, because I really wanted to capture the body paragraphs pretty directly within this thesis. Now, if your thesis is a solid thesis, then you should be able to pretty much predict what the body paragraphs are going to be about. So I can pretty much tell that body 1 is going to use TE1, discouraging students from learning. Body 2 is going to use the TE4, encourage the wrong values, and then TE3, not necessary for emergencies. Now, the order of the body paragraphs is not important. What's important here is that all the TE that you're going to use in your body paragraph basically comes out of, is born from your thesis statement. Okay? You're not introducing any new pieces of evidence. You're basically covering all the evidence in your thesis statement. This is a much more powerful way of making an argument so that the reader is very much now prepared for the evidence that will follow, but it also helps you, the writer, because you know exactly the direction you're going to go in. You've surveyed the evidence, you've summarized the evidence, written your thesis statement, and now, of course, you know exactly what your body paragraphs will be about, because you know the TE that's going to provide the core for each of your 3 body paragraphs. So once you've reviewed the evidence and you've got your thesis statement, and if you've got your thesis statement, you also have a general idea of your body paragraphs. Once you've got all that done, it's time to actually start writing the introduction. Now, of course, writing the introduction is oftentimes the hardest thing to do. That first sentence is really difficult to write. A lot of teachers tell you to start with a hook. Not a bad idea, but very difficult. How do you start off with an engaging idea that pulls the reader right in? If nothing comes to you, don't worry about it. Just start by simply restating the topic. In this case, the topic is cell phones and whether or not they should be allowed in school. That's all you got to do, is introduce that topic in the first sentence. Then in sentences 2 through 4, you want to provide some background information. Well, why is this topic important? Well, everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's got a cell phone, and they get in the way of class. So it's an important issue to think about, to deal with. As technology becomes more available, it starts to interfere with school. So it's an important issue today. You can also provide the background information for the articles that you're going to analyze. You're going to analyze Article 1 that's written by a teacher. You might want to introduce that you might want to say, I'm going to basically analyze an article written by a teacher in an editorial section of a newspaper, so you can provide the background information or context. And then finally, you always end your introduction with your thesis, okay? So you should have your thesis written and composed before you start your introduction. So we've got our thesis. Let's go now and start writing our introduction. So I'm going to start my introduction with my hook or topic, and the topic now, of course, is cell phones. And I tried to get into, I'm going to basically do it in 2 sentences. My hook here is, surely today there's little doubt that cell phones play a crucial role in the lives of many students. So I'm sort of hooking the reader in, explaining that cell phones are important. But I have yet to really develop exactly what the issue is. I'm going to take my time doing that. But this is a sufficient first sentence for at least setting the stage for the context of this analysis on cell phones. So now I'm going to give you the context and really frame the issue. And I start off with, however, while no one doubts the popularity of cell phones, it's not at all clear if cell phones should be allowed in school. So now I've really, after the second sentence, introduced the background for this analysis. That is, if cell phones should be allowed in school. So it's taken me 2 sentences to really introduce the topic of this essay. Now in the next sentence, sentence 3 and 4, I'm going to explain the context of my evidence. My evidence, again, is going to be that op-ed page written by a teacher, so I'm going to explain that to the reader. In her article for the op-ed page of the New York Times, Jasakya, a former teacher, discusses the impact cell phones have on classroom instruction. That's basically just a summary of the evidence. Okay, just a 1-sentence explanation for the evidence that I'm going to analyze. And I write, accordingly, Misakya draws from her own observations as a teacher and discusses reasons for and against allowing cell phones in school. Again, it's just another part of the analysis to explain to the reader where the evidence is coming from, what the evidence is, so that now I can really segue into my thesis statement, in which I state what the author, Jasakya, thinks about cell phones. So of course I end with my thesis statement. Misakya argues that cell phones discourage students from learning and are not necessary for emergencies and therefore should not be allowed in school. And I just want again to point out what's very important, that all the evidence in my body paragraphs is really contained in the thesis. Now I haven't written the body paragraphs yet, obviously. I'm still writing the introduction. But when I wrote my thesis, you remember, I made sure that I described all of the evidence first and was able to capture all the evidence in my thesis, so that now, after I'm done writing the introduction, I've written my thesis, I know exactly where I'm going to go with my analysis. Where am I going to go? Well, I'm going to go to the evidence that I summarized when I wrote my thesis. So here now are all 5 sentences of my introduction, and I want you to notice that I'm not holding fast to a specific transitional word sequence. Okay? By this time, I hope that you are taking bits and pieces of different word phrases from different categories and that you're not getting locked into a sequence. You should be confident enough now so that you know what the phrases do, how they work, and you should be confident enough now so that you know that you don't have to use them all the time. So you'll see in this essay and also in this introduction, I'm going to take what I want, where I want, and just write a logical and fluid analysis. So let's go back to our 4 steps to writing the essay. We reviewed the evidence and wrote the thesis statement. We've got the introduction. Now we're going to go and write the body paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. So for our body paragraphs, there's a few basic principles. I mean, basically, with transitional words and sequence lesson number 3, writing with textual evidence, which you've all completed already, all you were doing there is writing body paragraphs. So you should really be familiar with how to write a body paragraph. We've done a bunch of them already. You know it or not, that's what we've been doing. And the basic method is to insert the textual evidence into sentence 2 and restate it in sentence 3, although you don't have to do that. Again, I want to reiterate that you don't have to follow that basic method. You can put the evidence wherever you want. Just make sure you give yourself enough room to analyze it. And of course, make sure your evidence relates to your thesis. But if you follow the method that I've given you for writing your thesis, that is, if you first survey the evidence, then summarize the evidence, then write your thesis, if you've done all of that, you should have no issue here, because your thesis proceeds directly from your evidence. So again, we always refocus ourselves with our thesis. So we go back to the thesis, we reread our thesis, then we refocus ourselves on the body paragraph evidence. So our thesis is, Ms. Sackett argues that cell phones discourage students from learning and are not necessary for emergencies and therefore should not be allowed in school. Our body paragraph is going to use the evidence to discourage students from learning. Now let's take a little bit more detailed look at that evidence, and then we're going to insert the evidence into our body paragraph. So this is the full piece of evidence that we isolated. You should have, when you go through this process, as you will in the next lesson, you're going to need to identify and isolate the evidence. There's so many different ways of doing it: underlining it, circling it, writing in the notes column on your handout. Doesn't matter, just as long as you know what your evidence is. I like to mark the evidence and number it so I can easily identify it. And here's our TE evidence number 1, which will be our first body paragraph. Okay, so I'm just going to give you the whole body paragraph, since by this time you should be familiar with the categories and writing with textual evidence. And you can see I follow the basic format here, the basic sequence, and transitional word sequence from sentence starters number 1. So here we go. Indeed, cell phones prevent students from learning and make teaching impossible. After all, as Ms. Sackett observed during our many years teaching, a student with cell phone is an uninterested student, one with a short attention span who cares more about socializing than education. So to remind you that in that sentence we've got our transitional word phrase, after all, we've got our context, Ms. Sackett observed during her many years of teaching, we've got our quotation or evidence, and then we have our citation, Article 1. All of that must be there. Remember the 4 ingredients of the evidence sentence: transitional word phrase, context, evidence, and citation all must be in that sentence. Then we restate it. In other words, cell phones make it far more difficult for students to focus. Therefore, when students struggle to focus, teachers struggle to teach. All things considered, cell phones may help students keep in touch with each other, but they don't help students learn. Okay, this is a solid paragraph. It's not, great, but it's good enough. It achieves the purpose. I've given you the evidence. I've analyzed it. It's solidly done. So now that I completed the first body paragraph, I go back and refocus using my thesis, and I remind myself that my next body paragraph is going to be TE supporting encourage the wrong values. So I know that my next paragraph is going to be about the wrong values. And I go back and I actually look at the evidence and see exactly what the evidence says. And this evidence, TE number 4, is that cell phones are status symbols. So I'm going to work that into my body paragraph and get started with my body paragraph. And so now I'm on my second body paragraph, and this is what I've got. Cell phones encourage harmful values such as materialism. For example, as Ms. Sackett notes, cell phones are status symbols. That is to say, students base their own worth and the worth of others on the phone they own. Certainly, school should not be a place where students learn such a narrow way of perceiving themselves and others. On the contrary, school should be a place where students learn to open their minds with knowledge, not judge each other based on possessions. Okay, so I'm really trying to work that quote, right? I'm working that evidence. Cell phones are status symbols. I'm really trying to just work it as much as I can, pull as much out of it. And essentially this entire paragraph is interpretive. Okay, I'm basically trying to explain what that means when cell phones are status symbols, how that impacts the way that children think, and how that impacts their ability to learn in school. So you could look at this paragraph and really see it as simply all of analysis of that quotation. And again, please note, I'm using different words in different orders. I've taken some liberties here. I don't even use a transitional word phrase on the first sentence, and hopefully you too now are doing that. So my second body paragraph is done. I go back to the thesis, I refocus, I figure out where my third body paragraph is going. I remind myself that it's going to be not necessary for emergencies. So now I need to go look again at the TE in more detail. I go back to my TE number 3, I look at it in more detail, I reread it, and I get ready to insert it into my third body paragraph. So I take my third piece of TE, I put it into my third body paragraph, and here's what I've got. Ms. Sakia also responds to the parent's argument that cell phones are needed for emergency situations. In particular, Ms. Sakia thinks that in many emergency situations, contacting the hospital or the police would seem more urgent than contacting the parents, and parents can always call the school's main office to reach their children. I just want to point out real quick, you'll notice brackets in this sentence. The brackets occur within the evidence. You'll see the bracket, it says bracket, then contacting the parents. And now what I'm doing here is the bracket shows the reader that this is not in the actual quotation. This is me now. This is me, not Ms. Sakia. So why am I doing this? Well, I want to make it clear to the reader that exactly what she's saying. So I'm making it clear that it's more urgent than contacting the parents. So it's more urgent to contact the hospital or the police than contacting the parents. It allows me to insert some information to just make her quotation a little bit clearer. Sentence 3. To put it differently, cell phones are not a necessity. Keeping cell phones out of school does not mean that students will be unable to get emergency help. On the whole, students are just as safe and available without their cell phones. Again, we've got some basic sentence starters, a little bit different order, no sentence starter with the first sentence. It's a pretty straightforward and solid paragraph. Okay, so we've got 3 body paragraphs done. We've got our introduction done. That only leaves one place for us to go, the conclusion. So let's get on to the conclusion to see how we do it. Of course, other than the introduction, the conclusion is probably the hardest thing to write. A lot of times students simply restate the thesis over and over again and just repeat points they've already made in their body paragraphs. I'm okay with you restating the thesis, but just make sure you don't do it more than 2 sentences. And the real purpose, I think, of the conclusion is what I'm calling opening up the conversation, where you relate the thesis to a larger problem or question. The question could be technology in the lives of students, the pervasive, dominant, oppressive effect of technology in the mind of students. That could be the larger issue. And what it's important to do with the conclusion is to show that even though this is an analysis of this one article written by a teacher about cell phones in school, it's really about something that's much larger than that. The role of technology in the lives of students, the process of technology and learning. You've got all these big issues in the background, and you really want to hint at the fact that those big issues are at play. And the conclusion is the perfect time to do that. So here's my conclusion. Ms. Sakia offers a comprehensive argument for why cell phones have no place in school. Clearly, cell phones make teaching and learning more difficult and are not a necessity. So that's my restatement of the thesis, okay? I've pretty much said that already. I'm just re-emphasizing it, reiterating it. But now I move on now in the third sentence to opening up the conversation. I'm actually going to open up the conversation to a commentary about technology in general in school. So in third sentence, as technology improves and becomes more pervasive in our lives, we must ask if there should be boundaries. Perhaps school is a place where we should use technology sparingly and wisely for specific, well-thought-out reasons. Technology allows us to do certain things efficiently, but it always comes with a price. So really I'm opening up the conversation now and using cell phones as almost a symbol for technology at large, and I'm leaving the reader with something more to think about. This is really what a conclusion should do. It should provide a more general conversation that gets the reader thinking about big ideas.